Hello everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel, or welcome back to it if you've been here before. Today I'm going to be talking about my upbringing, my journey, some of the lessons I've learned, and the struggles I've had. Before I start, I want to make it very clear that this is going to be a video that will be honest, direct, be a little bit uncomfortable at times, but what I don't want to do in this video is to claim any kind of victimhood or victim status or sympathy of any kind or anything like that. I just want to tell the story as it is, and that's it. I actually did make another video, but it didn't quite pan out the way I wanted it to, so I had to delete that, and so here we are with this one. So, where do we start? Well, we start in April 1990, with the beginning of essentially the what you could call the club era, the clubbing era, the rise of rave and jungle, drum and bass, house and things like that, really, in terms of the UK scene. We have it was a time that was fraught with a lot of problems, economic problems, and so I think the 90s really was quite a flash pan, but impactful period. So, yeah, I grew up in the 90s. I don't really have too many memories of the early 1990s because I was only a baby or an infant, so I don't really remember anything. Well, I think I have some memories, but I'm not exactly sure if they're real memories or not. So I sort of like have sort of very faint, very grey kind of misty memories, but I'm not sure if they actually really happened until we get to sort of 95, 96. And that's when maybe even 1994, but certainly 1995 onwards. And that's when my ability to remember things very clearly started. I tend to remember things more from 1996 onwards because that's the period. Well, I'll get onto that in a moment. But anyway, so yeah, I grew up on a council estate in the east part of Hull, or what used to be called Kingston upon Hull, or Wyke a long time ago, or Kingstown upon Hull, as it was originally known. I think in the 12th or 13th century. And that wasn't an issue really. If you don't know any better, then you don't know, do you? So it didn't really. I didn't really bat an eyelid about it. It didn't even. I just thought that was a way of life, really. I just thought that was a normal way that people lived, because I didn't know any different. I didn't know any better, and it's not that's not to say that it's that's somehow wrong or anything like that. It's just that I just thought that was like how everybody lived, and I say that because as we'll get on through the story, there were a lot of problems that came up and continue to come up with people living in situations and places where there's social deprivation, economic deprivation and so forth. So yeah, I grew up on a council estate, pretty big one in the east part of the city. And really, it was in hindsight, I suppose it wasn't a bad upbringing overall. It could have been a lot worse. It certainly could have been a lot better as well. But I think for the most part, I had a good childhood. Really, I had a pretty decent run. Really, I suppose overall, everything considered. And in some ways, I'm actually kind of thankful that I did have that life. I wish some things had been different, but that's the way it goes. And you get the card that you get the cards that you get dealt, and you have to make the best of it, I guess, until you can get out of it and do something else, which I did. So yeah, I grew up with for the first few years of what I can remember, my very early childhood, playing with my brother Kevin, at the original house that we had on Irondale Road for a few years. I remember there was I think it was called Charlie or something, was he? Might be getting that name wrong. There was a guy next door that used to give us things through, pass over the fence, and we had pretty decent neighbours really. There was a guy opposite that was a bit odd. There was always starting fires in his garden. There was a bit of an oddball really. I did actually meet him a few times, and actually he was a pretty sound guy actually. He was a pretty decent bloke. Just a bit I don't know, screwed in the head or what. I don't know. I mean, maybe he had a reason for burning stuff. Maybe it was. I don't know, whatever. I always remember that as a kid. It was just always burning things in the garden. So I don't know if it was an arsonist. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But it always struck me as a bit odd. But it was in his teens or 20s when I was a kid, when I was really young. So I always got this kind of weird feeling about the guy. It was just a bit odd, and his father was a swimming teacher with the city council, I think. And I just say all that because these are things that I remember very well from being a very young child. And I suppose really, life wasn't too bad in the very early years, up until we was in that house until we was about 6, and then after that we moved to another house which wasn't that far away. And that's really where my life, in many respects, that's when the next chapter of my life kind of started to become more troublesome, and there were a lot of problems with my parents growing up, and I think upon reflection, now that I'm in my 30s and I've matured a bit and I'm a little bit less reactionary and emotionally dramatic as I used to be, I think I've just kind of had to accept, or maybe it's just a coping mechanism, I don't know, it's just a way of just trying to compartmentalize things, I'm not sure, but I think I think in certain ways my parents did the best that they could to some extent, but in other ways there's no easy way to put it, that they failed really. I think they failed miserably at parenting, and I think deep down they both know that, and that's I think really as far as I need to go with that side of things, because I don't think it would be right to publicly address things in finer details. But look, the best thing I can say is that I grew up really, as much as it pains me to say it, I grew up in a dysfunctional household. I grew up in a household where my parents went working, well, certainly weren't working in any kind of there wasn't any kind of really consistent employment going on between my parents. I mean, I think my parents really belong to their minds are essentially still in the 60s and 70s, really, I think. And I think that showed that they are and they were a product of their environment. They were a product of their time, and just as I am of my time as well. So it's not I'm better, they're worse. It's not like that. It's just that it's complicated, and it's like you have to have some level of empathy and understanding, and to some extent some degree of sympathy, because they didn't exactly get the best upbringings either. They didn't grow up in wealth. They didn't grow up in. They didn't have as many opportunities as kids have now, and as opportunities that I had. But having said that, they certainly could have done more, and they did have opportunities over the years to do things. Not as many as people have today, but certainly they had options, and they didn't take advantage of those things. And I think that eats them up, especially my father. Whereas my mother, I suppose she doesn't feel too bad, because I think she always saw herself as a housewife. Whatever you think of that. Like I said, I think that my parents are products of the time, and that they kind of still to some extent clung on from the attitude and ideas of their parents. So their parents grew up in the 30s and 40s, really. So I think they were influenced by that sort of side of things, but also the sort of liberal progressive movement of the 60s and 70s. And I think that's why I think they led the lives that they ended up leading for so long, because this had this sort of, I think, this sense of entitlement that was sort of drilled into them, but also they grew up in a time where there were a lot of problems, economically speaking, certainly in my city, and I'm not trying to make excuses for them or justify their actions or the lack of action, but there were reasons, there were things that we have to be honest about and look at. But also at the same time, we have to say that they made poor choices. They weren't motivated, or just were unambitious, whatever it was. And it's not. I'm not trying to get on my high horse here, or be an armchair judge or something or whatever. But they could have done a lot better, and they both know that. They both know they could have made more of their life, but they didn't. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. But I think in some ways they did the best they could, and in other ways they just completely failed to deliver in any ways that really were needed, given that they were parents, and in the consequences that happened, the things that happened because of that. That's why I know. That's why I can say the things I can say, because of the things that ended up happening because of their self-perpetuating, or whatever you want to call it, this cycle of toxicity and just sort of, I think in many respects, self-inflicted harm that ended up causing problems for everybody else. But I don't want to dwell on this for too long. But yeah, so anyway, that's the environment that I grew up in for a very long time. And that's not to say that there weren't some good parts, some good things that happened. You know, we had some good times, and you know, it's complicated. It's not always black and white. You know, there are nuances. There are things that happened that were great. That were good. We had some good times. We had some good Christmases and birthdays, and so I'm thankful for all of those things, of course. So it was difficult. It was difficult growing up, and then on top of that, I had a lot of problems at school, probably because of what was going on back at home, with the bullying, and it didn't help that I had ginger hair and I was a pasty-looking kid and a weird-looking kid, I guess, and maybe I kind of brought some of it on myself to some extent as well, because I was very quick to react, and I kind of maybe brought some of the attention on myself that I didn't want, but I didn't understand it as a kid, as I do now. So, you know, it is what it is, and it was what it was. But you know what? Overall, I think, even with all of the issues that I faced, I still think that a fairly good chunk of my childhood was pretty decent, and I still felt a sense of happiness and freedom at times. I don't want to get too far deep into all of that stuff because we could talk about that stuff for hours, but so yeah, I grew up in a time where it was a time of change, really. It was a great time of change. It was kind of revolutionary, the 90s, in many respects, and it was quite a powerful decade. It was quite a fiery period of time. It was much more lively and energetic and a bit crazy than it is today in certain ways. And you know, I remember like going to my auntie's house and hearing like Spice Girls and like Michael Jackson on TV and like Prodigy and things like this, and just the fashion, you know, the Kappa and the Adidas and things like that, and the food and just the culture of the society was different back then. It was a much different time, and it just goes to show how quickly things can change. In just over 2 decades, so 3 decades. So yeah, up until sort of 96, things weren't too bad really, as far as but then again I can't really remember that much, so maybe they were. And then sort of as I got into my middle childhood, later childhood years, I remember I don't know, kind of becoming more of into myself, and you know, I remember like my first friend that I ever made was David, from what I can remember. Probably when I was like 5 or 6, something like that. And I remember like getting invited to his birthday, and it was like bouncy castles and things like this, and it was a really, as a kid anyway, I don't know what it was like for adults, but as a kid it was a very magical time, the 90s. Just as I imagine those that grew up in the 80s or 70s, 60s would say the same thing. about those decades. I think we all do that, don't we? We all kind of cling on to our somewhat naive, but and you know, this. I think as a kid we're wearing rose-tinted glasses. We're not seeing reality for what it is. We're seeing what we want to see, because we're kids. We haven't got the ability to. We haven't developed enough yet. But anyway, but certainly it was a special time, and I remember going with my grandfather a lot as a. I think sort of from the age of about maybe 7 or 8 or something like that. I think I remember me and my brother Kevin used to go out a lot with my grandfather in the summer holidays. We used to go to Scarborough, Bridlington, Hornsey, Withensea, Skegness, Great Yarmouth. I remember I went once to Norfolk, Swaffham, I think it was 2000. And I met this lovely girl there called Alana. She kind of left an imprint on my life, although I don't think she intended to. But I've always remembered her, and I always felt that she was a really special person, even back then actually. Just quite weird really. I don't know where that came from. I think it maybe was just because it was so different to the life that I had, that it was quite impactful. And I think things are much more impactful on you as a child. Like, you don't realise how powerful things can be to your memory, your personality, your development, the way that you develop your outlook and attitude and things to life. It was a really wonderful. I think really my favourite years of my life, I suppose, were really not. And even though with all of the problems with all of the issues, and there were many, I would say that 1996 to 2013 were the best years of my life, because those were the years of my childhood, my teenage years, and my youth, my very young, being an adolescent and a young adult. But of course I've had good memories and good things that have happened since then, but I think overall those were the best years of my life. And I'll probably say that until I go to my grave. Or so yeah, going away with my granddad was really something very special. I think as a child, like going anywhere, you know, like going, because my grandfather lived at the other side of the city, in West Hull, sort of not that far away from what would it be? Not too far away from Cottingham, I guess. I'm gonna say. Could be wrong about that, but I'm just trying to remember. But anyway, he lived on the complete opposite end of the city. So going from that one end of the city to another as a child was like going from one country to another one, kind of thing. You know, especially when you're not used to going anywhere, which, to be quite honest, I didn't really go that much. We didn't really get out much as with my family, to be honest. I mean, apart from going, we had this thing when I was sort of heading to very late 90s and into the noughties, where we used to go to the hotel on Ferrans Way. I don't know how that started, but we used to go there a lot with my parents, and they used to hang out with their friends, and we used to go in the back room there, and they could just just chat away for hours and play snooker or whatever, pool, sorry. And we would just be kids. We'd go outside and play. We would play outside the front of the hotel sometimes, and out the back. And I don't know. You couldn't. I don't think you would get away with that now. I don't think you would allow that now. But back then, I think there was more of a sense of freedom back then than there is today. So that was something that we used to do virtually every weekend, every Saturday. Pretty much for the full, maybe half the day. And it was in a way I didn't like it because it kind of went on a bit, but also I kind of liked it because we used to get money and we used to get ice cream, and it was I always remember like getting like the Truck Trader magazine. I mean, it's weird, like I don't know why I was so fascinated by things like that as a kid, and like this, I think it was called Spine Chiller magazine. I used to get like Goosebumps and things, and very 90s stuff. What was it called? Bone Chiller magazine. I was always like fascinated and like scared by these things as a teen, like pre-teen. And like Pokemon, I remember like being mad about Pokemon and bringing cards to school, and my friend was mad about Transformers, and I remember watching Dragon Ball Z on the TV and Digimon, like The Simpsons and things like that. And it was a really special. And I keep saying that, but it was a special time, man. It was special in that it was something else. There'll never be another decade like that, I don't think. It wasn't perfect. There were problems like every period, but excuse me. But it was a fucking good run. It was a good time overall. So yeah, going away with my granddad was a popular thing as a kid. I remember, and I'm saying the things that I remember very clearly, very well. Like I remember the Christmas parties at school, like the Easter Bunny Parade, and like certain like events at school and things that we used to have. Where the teachers used to dress up, and we used to come in our normal clothes, like 50p or something. Like what the fuck? Like having to pay to wear your own clothes? Like what the hell? I mean, it was nothing. It was only 50p, but still, it's like a bit of a scam, really. But I remember like bringing the when we used to go to the blue area of our primary school, like this like reading area, called the blue area because it was blue, had blue seats, these big comfy cushion, really nice, lovely seats. We used to get to sit on from time to time. We used to sit there and watch used to drag in this big TV with like one of those like 17th century like Dutch organs or something, like with the other like shutters on them. It's crazy. And like watching a video, like obviously at that time it was all VHS. So I mean, I don't know when a DVD actually started, but it pretty much predominantly was VHS for a long time. I remember that being the VHS thing. My family used to watch a lot of things, music stuff and whatever. We used to tape a lot of stuff because that's what you did back then. I remember taping a hell of a lot of stuff on VHS because that was the only way you could do it. And also, like I think you used to like record stuff on cassette as well. And I remember cassettes still being around, and I didn't really get into CDs really until I think until sort of the early 2000s. I think that's when they pretty much became. I think they didn't really take off until the early 90s, from what I can remember. I could be wrong about that. Probably mid 90s, mid to late 90s, but I don't think it really became like a trend or a really popular thing until a bit later on, for the most part. I remember going into shops, HMV, seeing all the CDs and stuff. like going into Prospect Centre, and they used to have these water fountains that you could put money in them. You used to see like coins and stuff like that all over the place, and it was really, it was like Dream World as a kid. It was like Disney World. It really was like, it was so special. It was, I don't know what else to say about it. It was just so, it was, as a kid, it was heaven, really, in many respects. I had a great time. I had a good time as a kid in terms of, for the most part, my friends, my grandfather, even really at home a lot. For the most part, it was all right. It wasn't too bad for the most part. But really, the problem started later on. I don't want to go too far into that stuff because it starts to get really messy and really ugly and really, really personal, and I don't want to get too far into it because it's I don't want to drag people's names into things, and I don't think that would be fair. And I don't think I need to go into every nook and cranny and every aspect of my life, but so yeah, I mean, really, this could be a couple of videos. It could be a series, really. But I'm just trying to put together my main memories, really, the things that I am absolutely confident of, and the good things, really, more than the bad things. The most positive, the most memorable, most impactful, let's say, memories. So yeah, like I remember going to East Park a lot. There were concerts there in the 90s. I remember seeing a man juggling with fire in the city centre. I always remember that was always quite an impactful thing, and it's stuck with me all these years later. I remember at the time thinking it was so cool that this guy could juggle with things on fire, and you don't see anything like that anymore in the city centre. You just don't see these. I think Hull was a more of a quirky, little bit eccentric, a bit odd place in the 90s compared to today. It was a freer place. It was more interesting. There was certainly a lot more things to do in terms of nightlife back then. And the Deep is wonderful. It's a great thing. It's a great addition to the city. We need more things like that in the city. I think it would bring a lot more tourists and bring a lot of money into the city. That came in. I think that came in 2000 and I think it's 2001 or 2. Could be wrong about that, but I remember seeing that whole area getting developed. I remember going into town in taxis and getting taxis back from town. In the old taxis, the old black cabs. There was a sense of freedom back then. It's just difficult to describe. It's difficult to it just doesn't quite exist anymore. I remember the buses as well, the trains, the sprinters, there was a lot of different buses around when I was a kid, a lot of different independent companies, but that's a whole other video. But there was a lot of things that made the 90s what they were in my city, just like they did in London or any of the bigger cities, so anywhere across the entire country, really. It had an individual stamp to it. Things looked different, things sounded different, people were different in many ways. It was and it sounds obvious, but it was a very historic period, and I didn't realise how historic and important that period of time would be. especially a lot of people growing up, and certainly in the sense of, like I said earlier, clubbing, the clubbing movement, the popular youth culture movement, I think that started in the 50s, and I think had a kind of like a second boom or third boom in the 90s, thanks to electronic music, with the rise of things like, like I said, rave, like jungle drum and bass, garage, dubstep, things like that. New age stuff, ambient music. And of course, the foundations go back decades really, but their popularity really came into being. In fact, well, actually, some of the genres came into being in the 90s, but their foundations, their influences stem far back than that. So let's move on now then to the 2000s. Well, I don't remember a massive amount of the 2000s, just like I don't remember a massive amount of the 90s, but it's more like snapshots really. It's like a photo album, rather than a sort of like linear, or whatever you want to call it, consecutive or whatever, like a kind of bibliography or a comprehensive view of the whole thing. It's like that. I only have certain memories that I can. Of course, there are times when certain memories come back to me, and there are certain things that can trigger memories, whether it's a certain smell or a certain sound, or like sometimes on YouTube I'm watching things and one of my memories gets triggered, or something that I think is a memory gets triggered. So the 2000s. Well, I remember my parents celebrating the millennium. I remember them having a party. I remember that quite well. My parents' friends, my father's friends, really. Well, technically my parents, because they're both kind of friends with them coming around. I remember the Mini being quite popular back then, the newer version of the Mini, but also the classic Mini was still quite popular. I remember the liveries changing, the bus company livery changing, Stagecoach changed their livery, I think it was in 2001 and 2002. I remember that happening. I remember going to, like I said before, going to the hotel, going on trains with my grandfather. I remember going to Pleasure Island a lot in, I think it's Cleethorpes. Did that a lot up until I think 2003. I think that's the last time that we went there. I remember that was really amazing as a kid. It was so popular back then. It was if you went there a few years ago, you wouldn't get quite the same. But then again, we have to remember that I'm looking back through some level of rose-tinted glasses, but also, looking back at things through memories of a child's mind. So that we have to bear that in mind as well. It's not to discredit my memories or anything. It's just to say that, we tend to kind of gloss over aspects of things, and we tend to glorify certain things and sort of romanticize certain things, or to some extent. But I do remember as a kid going to Pleasure Island with my brother Kevin a lot. I think virtually every summer for like 3 years or something, 4 years. I think we went there. Could be wrong. I think we went about 3 times. I think. Could be. It might be 4. But then I remember in the early 2000s, my grandfather becoming psychologically unwell again. He had problems before, from what my mother told me about him. So that all came to an end. That I remember that very well. That we stopped going to see my grandfather. We didn't go to his house anymore. We didn't go to, of course, so we didn't go to the coast anymore. We didn't go to Pleasure Island anymore. So all that kind of, it was an end of an era, really. And he was in and out of, I think he was basically kind of hospitalised for his mental health problems for the better part of 20 years until he got put into hospice, I think it was. And he passed away a few years ago now, in 2016, I think it was. No, it wasn't 2016, it was 2015. And I saw him. I actually went to see him before, not long before I left the UK. He was a different person. He wasn't the person I remembered. He'd become very skinny, very aggressive, very hostile. Not just didn't want to see me. I think it wasn't just so much he didn't want to see me. He didn't want me to see him in that state that he was in. It was sad. It was very sad. It was really upsetting, really. It's hard, It's hard to see someone that you cared about, that you loved, that you respected, reduced to that state. And I'll get onto that in a moment. But anyway, I remember that period of the summer holiday fun stuff coming to an end. We very rarely ever went anywhere with my parents growing up. I think we once went to, was it like Brigade or Scarborough, I think it was. I think that was about it. I think that's the only time we ever went away. I'm sure we probably went, well, I know we went away a lot when I was a very young child, but when I was in my mid-childhood, don't really remember going anywhere at all, really. I'm not exaggerating, I can't really remember that. I remember us going away once, but I can't say we went away that much, because I don't think we did. I don't think we ever really did. Most of the time we just went to the town centre. We spent most of the day in the hotel, and my father and mother would get themselves silly drunk, as they would every weekend, for a long period of time. I mean, it didn't really bother me. We was having fun. I was just a kid, and it didn't really bother me. But and I remember being. More. I remember when I first started. This is difficult to talk about, but this is something I do remember about the 2000s. I remember being a lot more aggressive, probably because I was becoming a teenager. So I guess the testosterone levels were starting to increase because I was, hormonal changes and going through puberty and all of that stuff. I remember that stuff quite well. I remember seeing the Green Goddesses, what was the old army vehicles coming out. I think it was in 02 or 03 because the fire brigade went on strike. I remember there was a lot of arson attacks in the early 2000s. There seemed to be a lot more antisocial behaviour going on around that time. I remember seeing the police a lot. I remember seeing the police helicopter a lot more than I used to. I just wasn't paying attention. I don't know, but I remember the early noughties to mid noughties. There was a lot of problems, a lot of antisocial behaviour in my city, in my area of the city. It was quite a scary time, actually. think as a kid it was quite frightening to be among a lot of problems, whether it's vandalism, arson, just yobs. There was a lot of yobbery going on back then. There was a lot of sort of there were a lot of problems that happened in the late 90s, early 90s that I think stemmed really back to the 70s and 80s that hadn't been addressed. There was a lot of single parent households. There were a lot of there was a lot of crime, and I remember there was this. I remember this thing of I remember playing on computer games in like 2002, 2003 time with my old friend Daniel Langley. I remember there was this like summer project that I can't remember what the name of it is now. There was this thing that the police used to organise for, I think it was teens or pre-teens, whatever. I don't know. I think it was meant to be for. I think it was like 10 to 13 or 14-year-olds or something. And I was 1 year I was supposed to be a part of that. Like I was supposed to be helping like cutting people's grass and things like that, but it just never came about because we didn't get the tools and things. But I wish I could remember what it was called. I can't think of what it's called now. I think it was a joint venture between the council and Humberside Police, I think. I can't remember what it's called, but I remember that quite well. I remember 9/11 very well. I remember watching that on the TV with my father in the morning. I think I was supposed to go to school. I don't know if I went to school that day or not. I remember seeing it on the TV with my father. Don't know if my mother was in the kitchen or something, but I remember seeing that on the news. So that was when I was just starting secondary school. Because I started Isaac Newton in September 2001. I remember summer school. Remember that quite well. Going to the summer school thing for Isaac. Being excited about going, but apprehensive and nervous about going to a new school. I remember leaving Old Fleet Primary School. Remember that very well. I remember the last sort of few weeks, months of it, leading up to it. I remember the shirt signing thing. I remember what was it called? Bikers from. Bikers from Mars or something, whatever it was called. I can't remember the name of it. I remember there was a kid in my class who used to bring them to school. There were days where you were allowed to bring certain things to school, like a toy day or something, whatever it was called. It was towards the end of our time there. I always remember the weather at Old Fleet for some reason. I always remember the rain and like this sense of warmth and comfort that you got when it was inside the school, down the corridor. I always remember watching the landscape people come in to cut the grass, the tractor and the mowers, the triple mowers and the vans and stuff and trailers and machines and stuff that used to come into the school during the spring and summer, autumn period. It was left a big imprint on me, which is why I ended up working for that very same company for a period of time. In my teens, early adulthood. Which I'm glad that I did do, but also in other ways I kind of like massively regret it now in certain ways. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know, just life went on. I remember like the whole ringtone craze, the flip phone thing coming out. I remember one of my old mates, Danny, I think he was one of the first people I knew that had a flip phone. Was it 3G or something? It was back then, or so whatever it was. Free, there's a company called Free. I just remember him like watching things on, like getting access to the internet and like downloading like ringtones and things, and us hanging out together. I remember that a lot in the early to mid 2000s. Was hanging out with a gang of people. Sometimes getting up to no good, sometimes just hanging out, not doing anything, just hanging about, having a laugh, and just being kids, just being teenagers, really, as kids and teenagers do, you know. Sort of pushing the boundaries kind of thing, and seeing what's acceptable, what isn't. And just learning about ourselves, you know, and also the problems of peer pressure as well. You know, and the thing of trying to kind of keeping up with Joneses type mentality thing of like buying trying to like buy some swazzy. I remember like trainers being a thing back then of like street cred and things like that was quite, and the certain things that you wore and whatever. I remember secondary school, like always. I remember like that first term, we're like getting showed like the school. I can still visualise it, like the school book, like the main book that we had, and the units of the different, our curriculum and everything at school. It's weird it's weird the things that are still there if you just think about it a little bit, like it's a lot of stuff still in your head. You probably just haven't thought about it for a long time, but it's there. Some of it's crystal clear, some of it's a bit grainy. I remember some of the teachers, Miss Bell, Mr. Murray, Mr. O'Toole, so some of the names I just can't recall anymore. Bennett, Mr. Bennett, I remember him very well. He was a nice guy, IT teacher. There was an English teacher. I remember having a lot of crushes when in the early noughties, mid noughties. I remember that very well, like having crushes on the female teachers, and I was really horny a lot as a teenager. Still am. But yeah, as obviously as a teenager, you know, you're going through your hormones are changing, and you know it's quite a normal thing. Have teenage crushes and all that crap. I remember like going always flipping from one person to another person to another, and constantly having like interest in girls, and like for a few weeks, a few months, and like quite like her. She's quite nice. She's quite attractive. Then like not really interested anymore. Then going for another person, and just having sort of, you know, puppy love periods and things, and as I've talked about before on my channel. You know, the typical teenager stuff, really, you know, being rebellious, questioning authority, challenging everything, and sort of being a menace, really, to be honest. There were dark days, the early 2000s, because things were changing, and you know, the 90s was coming to an end, in terms of like the things were shifting away, and yeah, I think really sort of from when we got to sort of a 4 or 5 time, that's when things started moving in a different direction. You know, the 90s had kind of had its appeal. It had its time. It was time to move on, kind of thing. It was outdated by the mid 2000s. It was seen as kind of, you know, it was old. It was that was then kind of thing. You know, it was like, and it was. And of course, you do need at some point. You do need to move on to something else. You need to change and do something different and do something new. So it's inevitable. But you know, obviously, like today, in today's world, like the 90s, the noughties are like really massively popular on places like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, with so many people using those times for a lot of different ways, and a lot of people are looking back at those times in different ways and using those times for different reasons. So they obviously left a big impact on people. So once we got to 2003, I think in the very early 2000s I'd become a bit of a problematic child. I was fighting a lot. I remember that very well. I was always fighting with people. I was always getting into trouble at school, and I think something just snapped to me at a certain point. Something just changed. I remember I was vandalising places and stealing things, and I was out of control really for a period of time, and I kind of felt embarrassed and ashamed of it all. And I think it was then, and I felt guilty to my grandmother, because I think she was a very devout Christian, and I was starting to go to church. I think probably sort of like, what would it have been, maybe a 3 or 4 time I think I might have started to go to church. I mean, I grew up in what was still then seen as a predominantly Christian culture or society in many respects, and my school, my primary school was C of E, so I grew up in that culture, and that's had a lasting impact on my life, because I still like and enjoy certain aspects of Christian culture, especially the music side of things. I also really value and admire churches and abbeys and cathedrals and things like that, architecture, art, Christian art, so forth. But certainly more than anything, the music, the hymns, and the holidays. The holidays mean a lot to me, especially Christmas. So at some point I was getting into a lot of trouble. I got in trouble with the police eventually, I think on more than one occasion, regrettably. But like I said, I grew up in a difficult environment, and I'm not trying to make excuses up, but I did grow up in an environment that wasn't exactly healthy, that wasn't the best inside the house and outside the house. It wasn't all bad, but it certainly wasn't all good either. And so that led me to, I think, I got in with the wrong crowd for a period of time, and they know, those people who kind of drag me in with them to some extent, know who they are. So at some point, I don't know, I just remember getting a lot of trouble at school, always being in the main office because I was in trouble, swearing, fighting, just being a bloody nuisance, and it's embarrassing, to be honest, looking back at it all now. But at the time, I was in a mess. I think I think I was just pissed off with the world. I'd pissed off with everybody and everything. I was tired of the bullying. I was tired of the problems at home. I felt ashamed of the people I was around, even my own family to some extent, and just the environment that I was surrounded by. But eventually it changed. I remember like the teachers praising me at a certain point. I don't know if it was after 04 or 05, I think it might have been that time. And I just remember that I started changing. I started. My friend David introduced me to the Boys Brigade in late 2003. I remember that day very well because I was in maths. I remember him telling me about it. So, why don't you come to BB tonight? Or it was a Friday, and because we always went to BB on Fridays, Boys Brigade. 17th Hull Legends. That really did impact my life. So I think there were really a few things that impacted my life quite dramatically and made me change and try to be a better person. One, I think it was being brought up as a Christian, or at least somewhat Christian environment to some extent, and going to church, hearing about stories of the Bible and things from my vicar, sous sheriff. In school, she used to come to primary school a lot. But then going to St Hilda's Church for a period of time, I used to do that with my uncle every Sunday, and with my grandmother from time to time. I remember doing that. And then Boys Brigade came along, which I'd known about for probably, I don't know, maybe a year or two before I joined it. And so I did that eventually. I joined that in December of 2003. And I stayed with the Boys Brigade, I think, until 2009, I think it was. I remember the very last time I was there, and in 2009, it just wasn't for me anymore. I just remember just being there and feeling very I'd just outgrown it. I had outgrown it, but also my friend David wasn't there anymore, and Raymond wasn't there, and the people who I'd joined, who had started it to go with, weren't there anymore. I remember that very first time I went to BB, and with Derek Robinson and Martin Holmes and Philip Cookson, God rest his soul, and Matthew, what's his name? I don't know what his first name is, I can't remember now. Mr. Fish, who was there. Graham as well, who was there originally. He was there, I think, until 2004, I think he left. That really changed my life. That was a massive period of reflection, I think, in many respects, and it was the dawn of my teen years, and I think I'd felt for a long time that if I didn't change my way, I would end up going to prison, or I would end up in just a lot of problems, and I would have just ended up with a lot of other people on the estate that seemed to end up just on drugs or abusing alcohol. So that was like massively important for me. I didn't realise just how important it was at the time, and just how thankful I am to David for recommending it to me. And he had done a few times before I actually ended up joining it. I'll always be thankful for him for that. So I had a great, and that really opened my eyes in many respects, because being in the Boys Brigade, I got to go to new places and do things I hadn't done before, and hiking and camping and going to different places and challenging myself and learning things. Just maturing, really, I guess. Coming more and more into myself, I guess you would call it, or at least, developing myself, developing my personality, and learning how to try and be more productive and deal with things in healthier ways. And the sort of like small sermons that we used to have at the end of the night, and we used to sing a song together, and we was a really tight-knit community of people for a period of time. Like, I can't remember everybody's names, but we were a strong group of lads, really. And I can't say that we were all like besties, but when we came to the Boys Brigade, we all put our differences aside, and it was just so good to have that that sense of like loyalty, the sense of belonging, and I think that's kind of maybe that's what it was that I was lacking. I was lacking a role model. I was lacking direction. I was lacking the means to. I was lacking a sense of purpose and structure and discipline because I wasn't getting it. I think in places where I should have been, and so I think that in many respects probably saved my life to some extent. Not I don't mean in a sense of like, oh, I would have ended up dead. I don't mean like that. I just mean in a sense of, I think if I hadn't have gone to Boys Brigade, my life would have gone on a different trajectory. I mean, I don't know, but maybe not. But I suspect it wouldn't have panned out the way it has. It was a massively important period of my life, and I'm just so grateful for it. I can't even really express how thankful I am to Derek and Martin and Philip and all the rest of those guys, and Ashley and David and Raymond, Mark, all those lads, all great guys really. We all had our problems, and none of us were perfect. We all had our personality flaws and issues and so forth. But we were just kids, we were not kids, but we were teenagers. We were struggling. We had problems in our personal lives and at school as well from time to time. So that was a massively important thing. And spending a lot of time with my uncle, my father's brother, that was important. I love my uncle very, very much. He was a great guy, and I'll never forget him. He was a kind man, difficult man sometimes, but he was a kind man, and he had a good heart in him. And it's a bloody shame that he's gone, because I miss that guy. I really do. He was my friend, really. I really want to talk about that too much more. It's too difficult to talk about it, but like everybody, I've dealt with loss as well, bereavement, like everybody. So I don't see myself as a victim. I just see myself as somebody like everybody else that's had ups and downs and trials and tribulations and difficulties and good periods and bad periods. So that brings us basically up until the mid-2000s, where I started to become more romantically engaged, let's put it that way, with girls, and of course none of that stuff worked out because we were just teenagers, and talked about that before. Sometimes it's hard to talk about because I really did care about those women that I were teenagers at the time. We were all teenagers at the time. I was interested in, but that's the way it is. That's the way it goes. That's life. So, yeah, that happened. All of that period have happened. I've talked about all that before, so I'm not going to go on about all that stuff. And then we get to the end of school. I remember leaving school. I remember the whole prom thing that we went to. I think it was in the University of Hull. That was a good night. And saying basically, goodbye. Everyone saying goodbye, good luck to you. And it was quite an emotional night, really, in many respects. I suppose upon reflection, it wasn't at the time, but upon reflection, it was. It was a good night, but I think I left early for some reason. Can't remember exactly why that was, but probably because it went on to the late hours, I think. And that was the last time I saw a lot of the people that I knew from school. That was the last time. That was, not far off 20 years ago now. So it's been a long time. I haven't seen most of those people since I was 16 years old. And I suspect I'll probably never see some of those people ever again. Even some of the people that I was friends with, I suspect I'll probably never see them ever again. which is upsetting in a way. But you know, I wish them all good luck, and I wish them all good health and long lives and productive lives. But and hopefully one day, you know, maybe I can meet up with them again and have some kind of a connection, friendship with them at some point. But I don't think it'll happen. We've all, I think, gone through too much, and our lives have changed too much. There's a lot of them have had children, and you know, obviously their priorities rightfully are their children now, and that's just something you just got to accept. That's it. But I'm always here for people if they want to reach out to me. I'm always on Facebook if anybody wants to. You know, I doubt anybody ever will, but unless I actually see people in the flesh. You know, a lot of things have changed since I left school. The country's changed, the culture's changed, society's changed. I've certainly changed a lot in almost 20 years, as you would expect, and so probably most of those people, I would hope so. So, you know, I've had to do a lot of soul searching over the last 20 years since I left school. I had to do a lot of looking in the mirror and who are you, what are you doing, where have you been, where are you now, where do you want to go in the future, you know, what does your life mean to you, what have you learned about life, what have you learned, and I've mentioned a lot of things on my Facebook and YouTube about all of those things, but I suppose overall I've learned that you can't force people to talk to you if they don't want to, if they're not interested. You can't force people to change. You can't fight against change for the most part. It's just something that happens within yourself, internally, externally. There's not a lot you can do. You have to adapt to life. You have to make the best of things, and you have to develop coping mechanisms. You have to compartmentalize things. You have to develop some degree of empathy and compassion for people, even those that you might not like. And you have to be willing to compromise and listen and put your own attitudes and biases aside sometimes. Even if you are right about some things, you know, life's difficult for everybody. It's complicated, it's messy a lot of the time for everyone. It can get very difficult, it can get very hard, things can change very quickly in life, and you can change very quickly as well. And so you have to try your best to be kind and decent and nice as much as you can, but you also have to have boundaries. You have to put your foot down at times in life. You have to stand your ground. You have to develop some level of confidence in yourself and your abilities, but you also have to be honest. You have to change when things aren't working, when you're not happy, when you're feeling miserable. Those are the main things that I've learned, really. Many other things that would take a long time to go through everything. So yeah, so as I went into my later teens, friendships started to dwindle. Communication became virtually non-existent. You know, friendships died. Friendships withered away slowly. Some of them more quickly than others, slowly than others. Women became more of a presence in my life, obviously because I was, you know, raging, testosterone-fueled young man. But there's some, you know, but overall, and more or less the rest is history. I've had different jobs. I've had, you know, different partners. I've changed a lot, look different than what I used to. I don't think the same way as I used to. I've had to develop myself, and I've had to do some things that I didn't like, but I've learnt a lot and I've changed a lot and I've grown and developed and matured more in some ways. I'm happier in some ways than I used to be, and in other ways I'm content with certain things, but I'm also, I wouldn't exactly say I was filled with joy, let's put it that way, about the present or the future necessarily, but I'm not like miserable or depressed about it as well. So I think indifferent is probably the best way to describe who I am these days, for the most part. There's elements of me still that of my childhood, my teenage years, and my 20s, but I am my own person now, and you know, I've had you know, issues and problems with myself, and mental health problems, personality issues that I've had to deal with, and things I've had to accept about myself, and things I've had to learn about others and family, and I had to cut ties with certain people over the years. And so, you know, it's been a hard journey, it's been a hard life in certain ways, but in other ways it's been very rewarding. Would I have done certain things differently if I could have gone through it all again? Probably. But you know, that's all going well looking back with the benefit of hindsight. But you know, I think for the most part I've had a pretty good run. I've had a pretty decent life, I suppose, all things considered. But it certainly ain't over yet, and you know, I'm looking forward to the future to some extent, and you know, I'd like to do a lot more travelling, and I'd like to live in another country at some point possibly, but we'll see how it all goes. So that's basically my journey really. I mean, there's obviously a lot more I could go into, a lot of things, but it would take probably a good 5-6 hours to go through everything, and that wouldn't be good for uploading this video because it would take forever and it probably would fail, so I'm not going to do that. So, but yeah, that's basically the kind of outline of my life, as it were, so far, and I hope you've enjoyed listening. So I think I'll leave it there. I might do another part, maybe a part 2 to this, maybe at some point. But I think for now I'll leave it there. So thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon. Talk to you later.